Well, yeah, a question about sequels. Now, how often have you ever considered doing a sequel? Like, say, Ferris Bueller. Have you ever been approached about doing that, like a 10 years later type
Vaguely,
thing?
that sometimes pops up. And I always say, yeah, that sounds interesting, and then nothing happens. But every now and then, somebody in the John Hughes camp brings that up.
Yeah. Would that
That's the only one, though. None of them have wanted sequels.
yeah. Would that be something you'd be interested in doing, a Ferris Bueller sequel?
Uh, I bet I could get paid a lot. um, uh, I loved working with John Hughes, and I would very much like to work with him again, whether it was that or something else. It might be interesting. I'm not sure how appealing a 35-year-old, person who gets away with things is. I think you can forgive a 17-year-old more easily.
Matthew, I'm fascinated with audience etiquette these days. You go to a play and you got people with cell phones going off, talking out loud. You do a lot of theater. What kind of unusual interruptions have you experienced doing plays?
Recently, I did a play on Broadway, and several times people would take flash photographs, which I had never seen before, because and 9 times out of 10, it was, one time I actually had to, this person took like 5 flash photos in the opening number of How to Succeed. So I stopped, and I said, sorry, you can't take pictures like that, because the flashes and the dancers, it's supposedly not even safe. So I said, please don't take any more pictures. And he just looked at me like, so? And then the usher came over to him, and he was like, yeah, and gave it. And he seemed very blasé about it, and they took his film out, and very dramatic, and they gave him his camera back. And afterwards, it turned out he didn't speak any English at all. So I've always tried to imagine this poor guy, gets a ticket to his thing, he's like enjoying himself, and the show stops. And the star of the show wanders over to him and starts talking at him in English. And then a lady comes and takes his, it must have been awful for him.
Right. This is a question I asked your significant other in New York a couple of weeks ago. I travel a lot on airplanes, and sometimes I have the seatmate from hell next to me, the person who just, can't stop talking.
Yeah.
When you fly, what kind of unusual seatmates have you had, or experiences where people just won't leave you alone?
Well, I'm usually being flown by somebody, for some movie, and so they have to fly you first class. And I found that in first class, people tend to be very quiet. They don't like to talk much. But my coach days, people used to. I once sat next to I guess you would call him a Jesus freak, that was the most awful flight I've ever had in my life. He could not shut up. Yeah.
Have you learned any little tricks to discourage people?
You can put a Walkman on, is one thing. There's nothing to do. You could kill them. I don't know. What can you do?
Right. Now, well, this movie, shooting in New York, is this one of the few times where you could actually just walk home after a shoot?
It's happened to me a couple of times, but this one definitely was right in my neighborhood. Every place we shot, I knew intimately. Except then we shot in the set was in Brooklyn.
Okay. Now, this whole thing with being obsessed with somebody else, you're an actor, a well-known actor. How often do you have to put up with that, people who are obsessed with you and are following you? And does that ever happen, that somebody follows you home after a day's work?
No, not yet, thank God. That can be very scary, and I've done a lot of stage, so I always sort of worry about. That's getting more and more troubling. There's more people who do that now, I guess. But I'm scared some nut is out there watching this, like, I'll show him. He thinks nobody's gonna. I'll bother him. I shouldn't even do that. These are all could provoke them.
And
leave me alone.